you all for coming up regularly as you do and supporting us. When we put our talks agenda together, then it's always reassuring to know that people actually like what we're offering, which is good. If you haven't been before, or if you are regular, the fire exits are back out through the door there, or back out under the running man over there. You like to say running man these days still, is that all right? Under the running person these days. There are steps behind both doors, the outside doors down here, so please do be careful. And the muster point is like a water war memorial outside here, and is where we meet. We like to offer a variety of talks, as you know. You might remember a few weeks back, we had Clive Stapleton in, talking about his uncle Cyril, a local lad who tragically was killed. He was a gunner in a Lancaster bomber and was brought in the Second World War. This evening we've got a story about a local lad from the Second World War, but there I think the similarity ends. So, looking forward to a very different subject tonight, on the same sort of theme, but a very different subject. As we hear about Gran's boy, from our speaker this evening, please welcome Karen Higgins.
Hi, good evening everybody. First of all, a bit of an introduction as to how the story came about. I moved up to this area just over 50 years ago when I met my husband and married into a Newport family. Gran was my husband's grandmother, and I used to go and spend Saturday mornings with her when he'd gone off to work, and we used to have a great time. We used to have a little glass of what she called Overly Joyful, which was an afternoon wine and a cup of camp coffee. And there was always a fresh made cake, so we used to put the world to rights. And at the same time, she used to show me all around her cottage, which was a 3-storey cottage in Union Street. And in that cottage, she would point out chests, and she'd open it and show me paperwork in there, show me fabric, show me different items around the cottage, and tell me their history. And this wasn't like somebody keeping just clutter. This was sort of archived. It was like a family archive. She knew they were important. One thing she used to talk about a lot was her youngest boy. She had 3 children. She had my father-in-law Dennis, a lot of you if you're local would have known him as Sam Blackett or Sam Higgins or Dennis Blackett or James Higgins. He went by all sorts of things. But that was my father-in-law. Then there was their sister Kat, real name Margaret. And then there was Bob, who was quite a bit younger. He was the baby of the family. Den went off and, wartime, Den went off and joined the Grenadier Guards. Kath worked in a factory nearby doing electrical work. And Bob, at the age of 17, joined the RAF. He'd been working as a clerk in the local council. He'd been to Radcliffe School. He'd done well at school. And then he joined, as I say, the RAF at 17. On the memorial near the church, his name is there. You can see that there are 9 names of local lads that joined the RAF and didn't come back. They were incredibly young. What I'm hoping to do is to bring this one alive for you today and tell you what he did. And his story goes from Union Street in Newport Pagnell to the European War Theatre and how what he did and his crew, how it affected the war in Europe. And it had a considerable effect. And it's a story that's not known. I've always been interested in family history and research family history, and when I started looking into things like this, into this family, I thought it was going to be a similar thing: who died when, whose daughter was this, who's that. When Gran died, her daughter carried on living at the cottage, and when her daughter eventually went into a home, she said to my husband, "Right, can you clear everything out of the cottage for me? It's all got to go." And I said, you can't do that. Gran told me what all this stuff was. A lot of that is really important family history. So instead, he took a truck over, loaded it up with all the boxes and what have you, and he brought them back to our house. And gradually, we started unpacking these boxes. It took a while, because you know what it's like, you have all good intentions, but life gets in the way. And eventually, one day, we decided we had to unpack it all. Well, when I started looking at that hinted at a much bigger story. And it reminded me of one of the stories that Gran used to tell me, and I'll come to that in a minute. So here is your war memorial outside the church in Newport Pagnell. And this is Robert, and Matt's in as well. So these are the photographs that we collected from Gran's house that we found in some of these chests. He was 17 when he went off, and these were amongst his things when they went back to Gran's house, and then finally, eventually came to us. He joined at 17, and he started off in Paynton, was where he went as a cadet. Then he was taken over to America to train. He stayed at a couple of places like Oxford in between. They had a bit of training here and there as he went up into Scotland. Then he travelled through Greenland, Canada, and down into America. Because there was something called the Arnold Scheme. Does anybody know about the Arnold Scheme? No. We needed a lot of pilots trained. We needed them quick. But the skies over Britain were dangerous, and the traffic was very hard. The air traffic, there was a lot of it, and none of it was safe. So there was nowhere really that you could train a large number of pilots. An American general who was head of the United States Air Force, Harry Arnold, he came up with an idea that they would train our pilots in America, where they had the big open skies, the safe skies, and they offered to take them there. And Bob was one of those that went on the Arnold Scheme. So they travelled through Canada and down into America. There were 3 stages of that training. You had to pass each one before you went on to the next one. In fact, they took, and I do have figures here, but I'll try and remember some, they took approximately 7,500 of our guys to train them. But only 3,400 qualified. The others were either eliminated, they didn't pass as they went through, and 81 were actually killed in training. So the percentage that came back was fully trained somewhere, was just over the sort of 55%, something like that. These photographs of Bob here, the one in the middle is one that you'll see again a bit later. And I've been told since, and found out from sort of looking into all this, that those bubbles on top of the forehead here mean that you have flown solo. You've qualified to a certain level. So that was a very proud sort of thing to do, to have that on here. Here you can see very, very young looking Bob at 17, going in as a... He came back to England when he was 19. And what they did, when they qualified with the Arnold Scheme, they qualified for the United States Air Force. So they were given US wings and insignias. When they got back to Britain, that was swapped for them, for our AF insignia. And as I say, these are pictures that came back from Bob's things. This table gives you an indication. This table is 8 foot by 4 foot, and it is covered in piles of paperwork. This is the archive that we inherited. And some of this is to do with Bob, some of it's to do with Dennis, and other and that generation, some of it goes back to the 1860s. And there are a lot of postcards there that a lot of postcards we use like we would use messages nowadays, because the post would be delivered several times a day. So where one of the brothers or uncles lived in Loughborough, he was on the farm, was going to come over for tea, they were all due to go over for tea on Sunday afternoon. You'd get one that says, sorry, we can't get there this afternoon, there's a problem with the cows, or something like that. So it was used like instant messaging. So we've got piles of those. This box down at the front here, and I'll show you a close one, is all the letters that Bob ever sent back through the war to his family. They archived them all. There's all the letters that Dennis ever wrote back through the war, and Dennis was left behind at Dunkirk, so he's got interesting stories there too. But Bob's are all there. Now, what I knew from Gran was that Bob had been killed during the war, that he'd been a pilot, and something that I wasn't supposed to know because she wasn't supposed to know and she had never told anybody else, was that he told her he used to deliver radios to the resistance and to agents, drop-off agents. And she hinted at her, I think that's right, but I'm not supposed to know that and I wasn't supposed to tell anyone. So I never mentioned it either. It was just something Gran and I had talked about. But what had happened when Bob went missing, he literally went missing. All they knew was, she knew was that he was probably under the Ishmael, the Zidazine. And the only reason they had that hint was because 4 bodies of his crew washed up on the shore of the Ishmael. So she knew from the communication with the other families and from the fact that those bodies were friends of his, because she'd met them. They were based at Tempsford near Bedford, over the other side of Bedford, and they would cycle back and have tea with Gran. So she knew something with these other lads as well, but the bodies were washed up there. Nothing else did she know. If those bodies had not washed up, there would have been she'd never have been told where he was. And this is something I found out later when I found out more about what happened with Bob. From these letters, there's the box closer up. I went through them all and put them into categories of where they were written from. And you can see them back there. There's some other documents around here to do with his time in the RAF and his time in America, and the newspaper cutting when he went missing, the local paper. These documents, this is his training, some of his training manuals. There is Bob's handwriting. That's his own notes when he was training. And here are his insignias. And this is souvenirs of his from when he was training in America. So you can see his residency, his alien registration card, postcards from the part of America that he was in, which must have been amazing. You see the width of those roads there. And he came from Newport Pagnell. Back in the day, when it was much more rural, they were more likely to see cows at market than they were to see big cars and stuff like that. And these have given us a lot of amusement, which is it's the Students' Magazine, one that they produced. And they all wrote articles, and the instructors wrote articles. And so these came back. He's got a new sheet from Iceland there, and then we've got the booster, and then we've got this one, which I just thought you would not get away with that today. Look at that. Remember Pearl Harbor, keep them dying. This is, and the stories in there. In the middle, we've got no axis yet, but RAF flyers kill buzzards. And that was another trainee called Payne, was the pilot, and Bob was in there as the co-pilot, and he had to bail out because they hit a buzzard, and Bob had to get out, and the buzzard died. So yeah, that's where we are with that. And those letters, I'll go back to the letters in a minute. But these are like yearbooks for the courses that he did in America. And this is exceptional. We've got Bomber Command actually want these, but they're going to get copies because until I know what we want to do with them. From the different courses that he did, they had these magazines and they had the yearbooks. This yearbook, which was the final yearbook, when he qualified, this is where that original photograph comes from. You see him with his goggles up on his forehead there. And you can see quite a few of the others have got the same, one or two that haven't. But each one has a little biography written under it. And what's exceptional about this one is that Bob went round and got every single person that was on that course, including the instructors, to sign their pictures. And then as he went on, over the next couple of years, if he heard any news of any of them, he updated it. And he wrote little bits, there's little captions here in his own writing under here, where he's learnt more about one of these pilots or others. And some of them are awful, you know, heard he bought it over France, and it's or now flying Oxfords from somewhere or other. So he kept it all updated. Bob's, I can tell you what Bob's. The yearbook, the words that they put on the book, born in Bucks in December 1922, he was one of our youngest cadets. Joining the RAF in 1941, he was stationed at Paynton, where he spent some very happy days. He is the envy of his flying instructor, who is daily learning new ways of doing manoeuvres. He hopes that his many hours fishing from the banks of the river will prove useful when he starts fishing for bigger game. There's a little tongue-in-cheek comment, I think, there. He obviously was a very good pilot, but a bit original in the way he managed the manoeuvres. Those letters that we saw, because we worked out where they came from and the dates, we found that his final location was Tempsford, and that his squadron number was 161. So I started the research by going to the library in those days and looked up the different squadrons and found that 161 squadron was a bit special. It was one of the special duty squadrons, and I don't know if you know what that meant, but the special duty squadrons were top secret. They were the ones that flew the SOE agents, and they're often known as SOE squadrons, but in fact they did more than SOE. They also flew for SIS, or MI6 as we tend to call it, Secret Intelligence Service. So their job was to fly any of the secret missions, and the 161 squadron also doubled up as the King's Own squadron, so the King's Own flight. From that, they just had a little bit in the library. Then as the internet got better and got more information, started looking on the internet and learning more, and through that found out about Tempsford, and that Tempsford was this top secret base where 161 and 138 Squadron left from for their missions. When Bob finished training in America, he came back to England, had his insignias changed back to RAF, and he went to Strathers Hall. And this is slightly wonky, but for some reason, this is his class of 42. from Stradisal was an HCU, which is a heavy conversion unit. So pilots, once trained, and had members of the crew, who were trained on smaller planes, then wanted to go into heavy bombers. They went to an HCU, a heavy conversion unit, where they trained to run, and I say run, sort of manage the large aircrafts. That's the Lancaster, the Wellington, the Halifax, and there are others. Stirling is quite large, and the Oxford. So Bob flew Halifax, but the Halifax took a crew of 7 or 8. Bob was a pilot. At this age, he's 19, and he qualified. On this picture, it's a shame it's a bit lopsided, I don't know how that's happened, but there's you find that there's names here that are underlined. This is, excuse me going front, that in the middle there, just by my finger there, the tall guy in the row before the last, is Bob. Cochrane here, there's one called Martin, his real name is Partin. There's a chap at the top called Groom, his real name is Groom. Whoever did the writing on this, we don't know what happened, but the names, so many of the names are wrong. There are in fact 5 people who were with him on the final flight, and who they all volunteered together to go on the special duty squadrons. So they transferred from Stradisal, once qualified, to Tempsford. This is Tempsford. This is all that's left of the Tempsford airfield. You've got the 2 squadron insignias there. This is the 161, and that's an open shackle. They stood for freedom. That was their motto. 138 did very similar work. And one of these you may have heard about is the Tempsford taxi, which is the Lysander. If you're taking agents or any equipment into somewhere, you can parachute them in, you can drop them from the converted bombers. If you have to pick them up, you need a smaller plane. And that's where the Lysanders came in, and 161 also had Lysanders. But Bob flew a Halifax. It was the most secret airfield that we had through World War II. Hitler referred to it as a nest of vipers. He knew they were there somewhere, but they couldn't find them. And he tasked agents with looking for it. The story goes, and I haven't tried to confirm this, but the story that's told around Tempsford is that 2 agents got within a couple of miles, German spies, got within a couple of miles of Tempsford before they were caught, and they were shot. They took no risks of that being found. So, yeah, that's how important that was. My research on the internet, because now I knew it was 161 Squadron, I knew it was Tempsford, I could use that to search. And the search took me to a group called Tabara, the Tempsford Veterans and Relatives Association, which was run by an amazing man called Bob Bodie. And from there, we learned an awful lot more, and that's when we really found out what Bob and the rest of his crew and the others from Tempsford did. So we've reached we're nearly there. Got a bit longer. Tempsford, do you know the story of They Carved Her Name with Pride? You've seen that film. Violette Zarbo left from Tempsford. So do most of the, if you go back through the books and you see these spy books, and this is where the agents left from. Most of them. That barn at the top there is the last building any of them ever saw when they went off. The Tempsford airfield was on a farm called Gibraltar Farm, And they managed to keep it disguised as a farm. It was never, so it was never found. That building is where agents and crews had all their clothing checked from top to bottom. Everything in their pockets, make sure they were carrying nothing that could identify them as anything but what they were claiming to be. All their dental work, there was a dentist in there who checked their dental work. And they, before they went, they were trained on codes. And the codes were given to them at Thames. So they were trained up before at Baker Street, but then their final documents and that were given to them in that barn there. And that's where they left from. So that's the significance of that barn. That barn's been restored by Lord Errol, who owns the farm and the land around there. And we get permission as the association to go in there twice a year, and we will be going this Sunday as their guests to have a remembrance service for the missing from the agents as well as the crews. When I was with Gran, in those mornings, one of the things she wanted me to do, and I said I would do, and didn't because I couldn't, was that she wanted to go to Runnymede again. They went to the opening of Runnymede, and she wanted to go back there and take flowers from her garden for Bob, and I said I'd take her. But Kath took me to one side. Gran was in her late 80s by then, and her health wasn't brilliant. She was a sturdy little lady, but she had a few problems. But Kath said, there's no way you can take her. She won't cope with the walk from the car to there. She won't cope without the facilities. Can't do it. So we always found little excuses when we had to put it off and put it off a bit more. Now we go to Tempsford every November. We go in the summer for a chat and we share history. But November we go and we will remember those that were lost from Tempsford, and we put a wreath there for Bob and his crew, and I hope Gran thinks that's suitable. So I think that's going to be where we're just coming up for 8 o'clock for gathers when we want to do the break. Has anybody got a question at all at this stage? Yes? No, there were different places. They went to Alabama, Georgia. There were 3 areas that in particular he went to. He was near Macon. They were mostly in Alabama and Georgia. So, you would never find it. It's tucked away across fields, and it's got security gates and everything across the farm. It really is still very private. So we're on gate duty on Sunday to check everybody's passes when they come in. Actually, so, it's near Tempsford Village. We don't know yet. I know we're going to have the buildings that are going. I don't know. We're waiting to find out.